Well, good morning, Christ Central, and welcome to our daily devotionals. Today, we are going to be reading about the Good Samaritan in Luke's Gospel. And I'm going to start by reading my NIV version, and then I'm going to switch to a modern day version of the story. And it's very American, just to warn you, there's lots of Americanisms in it, but I will do my best to read it, but without the accent. Okay, so the parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied with the following story. Early one evening, a successful young man took his new Nissan Maxima to the mall to buy his girlfriend a Christmas present. He had heard on the radio that his usual route was closed off, so he decided to chance it and go through the crazy, dangerous area of Samaria to get there. He figured it was a better choice than having to go all the way around the city, thus adding 2 hours extra to his journey. Well, the area he had to cut through was in the north end of the city, known for its gang warfare and biker bars, and he had chosen the completely wrong time to go through. As young punks started to gather for their nightly escapades, and certain young ladies went outside to claim their pieces of the sidewalk for their nightly business of selling themselves. At a red light, the young man stopped and found himself in the middle of a gang war. The gang member from one group took a shot at his enemy across the street, and the young man in the Maxima was the unfortunate barrier between them. The bullet barely grazed his shoulder, but he cried out in sharp pain, managing to pull over and stop the car. He got out of the car, intending to go and get help, but in his weakened state, attracted the wrong kind of attention. A couple of kids looking for some quick drug money noticed his stupor and decided it would be easier to give him a couple of punches than try and break into a store. They also noticed his car keys and the car running close by and put the two and two together. Soon he was out of a car, a cell phone, and his wallet. By the time they were gone, he was in rough shape and lay smashed and dirty on the sidewalk. He lay there for what seemed like hours, but it was only a few minutes. He was thrilled when he looked up and saw a pastor from his local church walk by. "Help, John!" he cried out. But the leader crossed over the other side of the sidewalk and didn't even look his way. Now, the minister didn't usually walk this way, but he was on his way to a board meeting for all the churches in his district. Unfortunately, it was one of the rougher areas of town, and John really wasn't used to this environment. He wished he'd been able to find parking closer, but he'd been forced to walk several blocks to his destination. He saw the man lying down a few streets away and felt a bit nervous. Who knows what that man had been imbibing in order to be that intoxicated? Often these people were dangerous and unpredictable. Just for security's sake, he crossed over to the other side of the street. He was already late for the meeting, and he didn't want any complications. "I'm sure the police will deal with him," he thought. "I need to get going." A faint wave of guilt washed over him, hoping this man would be okay, but he quickly told himself that it wasn't him who was responsible for saving the world. They have other people for that, he thought. It's not my calling. About half an hour later, a very frequent lady churchgoer walked by in a rush. She was carrying her Bible, and the injured man thought for sure she would help him. He tried to call out to her, but she didn't help. She put her nose in the air and quickly walked away in horror and disgust. The woman had lived on that street for years and had seen everything decline in the last decade. What had once been a hard-working population had been overrun by hookers, pimps, and drug addicts. Every day she heard of more horrors on the nightly news, and it made her sick. She had once been so proud to live here, but now she lived in fear. When she heard the young man call out to her, she was sure he would be begging for money to buy some more booze. She was tired of being bombarded by these welfare dependent bums. She looked at him in disgust, anger at the way the country was going, and hurried home to her little apartment with bars on the windows and a good security system. She knew she shouldn't have gone out so late in the afternoon. Just as he was almost passing into unconsciousness, the young man caught a glimpse of a man in a jean vest covered in decals and tight trousers. He would have been afraid of this biker-looking man under different circumstances, but he had no fear left, only vacuous curiosity. I wonder what kind of bike he drives, he pondered. The man, who was dressed like a biker, parked his Harley Davidson and decided to hoof it to the bar where he was going to relax for a few hours. He'd had a hard day at the mill and was looking forward to forgetting his troubles with some good friends. Later, he'd grab a cab and pick up his bike in the morning. No one on the street would dare to touch it. Just as he neared his destination, he noticed a young man who looked like he'd been beat up pretty badly. Feeling sorry for him, he went over and gently felt his wrist. Yeah, he was still breathing. "Are you okay?" he whispered, not wanting to startle him. "Not really," the young man replied. "Let me call you an ambulance. You look like you're in pretty bad shape." He used his cell phone to call 911, waiting with the young man until they arrived, and paid the ambulance driver the $500 fee. "Take my cell," he told the young man, "and use it to call your mum and dad and girlfriend about where you are. And here's a couple of $100 to tide you over until you get your ID straightened out." "Sorry what happened to you, man. These guys were jerks." The young man left in the ambulance and went to the hospital, used a cell phone to call his family and friends, and afterwards called the biker to give him back his cell phone. "How can I ever repay you?" he asked. "Don't worry about it," the biker told him. "There are still a few good guys left in this world." So today's story is very clear about Jesus' teachings on how to love your neighbour as yourself. Conflict, distrust, and hate still exist today between groups of people. We see prejudice and segregated neighbourhoods everywhere. Even where I live in Reigate, you only have to name a road and everyone knows what side of town you're talking about, what type of person lives there, be it positive or negative. These judgments are often based on wealth, education, ethnicity, and a whole load of other self-righteous criteria. The message of the Good Samaritan is as relevant today as it was with the conflict between the Jews and the Samaritans. We're called to help if the person in need doesn't look like us, speak our language, or believe in our God. We're called if that person has hurt us, is rude to us, or tries to ignore us. If someone in need is put in our path, either physically or metaphorically, we are called to help. Sometimes the way isn't simple, and we feel like the regular lady churchgoer or the pastor in the story. Fairly recently, a lady moved into the top of my road. We got chatting one day, and I could see she was in need of a sort of friendly local face, so I invited her round for a coffee in the garden. It soon became evident, though, that her troubles were more than I was prepared for, and to my shame, I backed off. I took the easy way out and gave her some contact numbers and lots of tea and cake. This was probably maybe a sensible thing to do with the numbers, but I also started crossing the road, like literally crossed the road to avoid. I felt the guilt wash over me, like the church-going woman in the story. But I consoled myself with the words, "Well, I'll just pray for her." Then I saw her quite recently again, and she stopped me on the street, and she was in a much better place. And I felt really ashamed because someone else had stepped up to be the Good Samaritan. It wasn't me. But God was gracious, and now we have a good, friendly, neighbourly friendship, really. I don't cross the road anymore. In fact, I stop her for a chat. Jesus very clearly says at the end of this parable, "Go and do likewise." We may well have failed in the past, but there will always be more opportunities, especially as more and more refugees arrive in the UK. I don't think we're going to have to look very far. Thank you for listening.